The new year is supposed to be a time for fresh starts and new things. It's supposed to be about new beginnings. But for one mom of three, it was the end of her life. And all it left was a mystery behind, a lot of unanswered questions. But one of the biggest questions was, who ended Ashley's life? Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. And if you've never been here before, I am Kimbyrleigha. It's nice to finally meet you. And it is the new year. I can't believe that 2024 went by so fast. And I know that everyone talks about making really big plans in 2025. But I feel like sometimes it's the small, consistent ones that matter the most. Whether it's finally hitting the gym, even if it's just once, which I keep telling myself, or maybe calling someone that you care about more than you do now, or just simply taking a walk to clear your mind and just maybe get a few steps in while you're at it. Whatever works for you. But whatever your goals are, Raycon Everyday Earbuds are there to keep you motivated and connected every step of the way, and I want to thank them for sponsoring today's video. The Raycon Everyday Earbuds fit into my plan for 2025 by helping me get through the nights with baby Mazzy. I just put them in, I listen to a video or some music, and I rock her to sleep, and I multitask. I'm kind of also getting in some work if I'm listening to cases or information about them for you. They are truly your ultimate companion, whether you're powering through a workout, tackling your workday, or catching up with a loved one. With premium audio and a sleek design, they're built to go wherever life takes you. And the latest model takes things up a notch with an impressive 32-hour battery life and multi-point connectivity, so you can seamlessly pair with two devices at once. No matter where your day leads, Raycon Everyday Earbuds are there to keep you connected and in your zone. I've been using them for quite some time, and they are a must for me so I can keep up with my favorite YouTube creators and also the latest cases. I love the quick charge feature. For just 10 minutes of charging, it gives you 90 minutes of listening. Plus, the ergonomic design is crafted to fit a wide range of ears comfortably with optimized gel tips for a snug custom fit. And I'm obsessed with these sleek protective case covers. First off, look at the design. It perfectly complements the earbuds colors and it lets you show off your personal style. But they're not just about looks. These covers support wireless charging, so you don't even need to take the covers off to power them up. They're stylish and functional. So go to buyraycon.com/Kimber to get 20% off site-wide. That's right, you're going to get 20% off everything on Raycon's website when you go to buyraycon.com/Kimber. And remember that every time you buy from one of my sponsors through my links or my codes, it helps to support this channel. And I want to give a big thank you to Raycon for sponsoring today's video and making it possible. Now let's get into the case for today. Ashley was born on October 8th of 1983, and at the time her mother, Jenna Fox, had a 3-year-old son named Bryce, and at some point, Jenna became a single mom. And later, when Ashley was 3 and Bryce was about 5, Jenna met a man named Joel Ragadin, and she would go on to marry him. And although Jenna brought 2 children into the relationship, Joel embraced Ashley and Bryce as if they were his own children. Ashley had an easygoing, fun-loving nature about her from a very young age, and she developed a great sense of humor. She had the brightest blonde hair as a baby and pretty green eyes. She shared a very strong bond with her mother, and as Ashley grew up, she and Jenna became like best friends. They did everything together. Jenna was Ashley's confidant and her biggest supporter. To celebrate her high school graduation, Jenna and Joel actually took Ashley on a vacation to Playa del Carmen in Mexico, and she and her mom actually got up and they would be dancing on tables together and having a lot of fun, soaking up the sun and just spending quality time together. They were so close that at times Jenna had to create boundaries and reinforce that of course she was Ashley's friend, but she was first and foremost her mother. Ashley also grew very close to Joel. He would take her on father-daughter outings so that they could spend time bonding with one another. And one of their favorite things to do was to go snowboarding together, something that Joel actually taught Ashley how to do. And according to Joel, she was quite the adrenaline junkie after that. And after high school, Ashley actually married her high school sweetheart, and they had 2 daughters together, Madeline in 2002 and Jolie 3 years later in 2005. However, the relationship between Ashley and their father did not last, and their marriage eventually ended. By 2007, Ashley felt that it was time to start dating again, and she turned to the internet like many people do these days. and she had grown into a beautiful, intelligent woman. By now, she dyed her blonde hair dark, and sometimes she would have those light blonde pieces underneath, which was definitely the style back in the early 2000s. But it wasn't just her appearance that stood out. Ashley was confident. She enjoyed the simple things in life, like eating her favorite dishes, manicotti and creme brulee, or sipping on her signature Starbucks order, a grande caramel macchiato with an extra shot of espresso and extra caramel. But Ashley was also incredibly hardworking. She studied hard and she became a respiratory therapist. This was a role that she was quite proud of. And like I said, it was in 2007, when Ashley was 24 years old, she decided to try some online dating. And that is when she connected with 27-year-old Tom Fallis on Match.com. Ashley and Tom's first date went so well that before long, they were spending almost all their free time together. Tom was eager to be a part of Ashley's world, and he quickly stepped in to help her care for her young daughters. They were 2 years old and 5 at the time. Their relationship moved very fast, maybe faster than either one of them even expected. But about 5 months into dating, Ashley discovered that she was actually pregnant, and the news prompted a very big decision. They would move to Greenlee, Colorado, so they could be closer to Tom's family. Now, at the time, Tom had recently quit his job in Denver and found himself struggling to land a new position. But eventually, he was hired as a corrections officer with the Weld County Sheriff's Office. Meanwhile, Ashley was determined to keep her career on track, and she secured a job as a respiratory therapist at the Northern Colorado Medical Center. It felt like their new life was falling perfectly into place. Not long after Ashley gave birth to their son Blake, the couple's happiness continued to blossom. Tom had planned a romantic proposal over a home-cooked dinner, but Ashley's excitement took over, and instead, he actually popped the question right in the parking lot of Jared's jewelry store, a spur-of-the-moment gesture that seemed perfectly fitting for their whirlwind romance. Just 2 weeks after Blake was born, they got married, and by 2010, Tom had officially adopted Jolie and Madeline, whose biological father had actually relinquished his parental rights. Although Ashley's parents, Jenna and Joel, supported her, they worried that everything was happening way too fast. After all, Ashley and Tom had only been together for about a year. Still, Ashley believed Tom was exactly what she and her daughters needed: a steadfast, loving, and committed man. She was convinced that this was her fairy tale ending. She was surrounded by her family, and she was full of love for Tom. Ashley was the type of person that once her mind was made up, it was nearly impossible to persuade her otherwise. Yet, when her mom cautioned her about having more children at such a young age, Ashley chose to listen. Following Blake's birth in March of 2008, she underwent a tubal ligation to prevent further pregnancies. In other words, she had her tubes tied. And while this procedure is considered to be permanent, it's done by blocking, cutting, or sealing the fallopian tubes. A reversal can be possible under certain circumstances, but nevertheless, Ashley felt confident in her choice. She believed this was the right decision for her and her family. Ashley's mom's anxiety stemmed from her concern for Ashley's future. She was worried that maybe Ashley and Tom's relationship might not stand the test of time, because remember, Ashley had been married once before, and that relationship ended. But Tom was determined to stand by Ashley's side, insisting that he was not going anywhere. Although Tom had always envisioned a big family, he accepted Ashley's decision to stop having children, and he supported her all the way, wholeheartedly. And he assured her that his commitment to their family was rock solid, regardless of any challenges they may face. After settling into their new life in Greenlee, the couple soon felt the pressure of outside forces. Ashley's ex-husband started making attempts to gain custody of Jolie and Madeline. This created a constant undercurrent of stress in their life. And on top of that, their conflicting work schedules began to strain their time together. This created more and more arguments whenever they were both at home. And by 2009, the tensions had escalated to the point where Ashley actually considered a divorce, and it even had some paperwork drawn up. However, a serious conversation with Tom changed her mind. She realized that despite their disagreements, they still cared deeply about each other, and they hoped that they could have a future together. Ultimately, Ashley decided not to go through with the divorce. She wasn't willing to abandon the relationship that she believed could be saved. But that same year, in 2009, just as Ashley and Tom were recommitting to their marriage, a new challenge emerged. One that would change their family's life forever. Their son Blake had always been a healthy, happy child, and a joke around the family was that he had inherited a big head from his dad. But around Thanksgiving that year, Blake pulled on a string of beads that were hanging from the fireplace, and a heavy stocking holder fell and hit him in his head. They were so concerned, but they were trying not to panic. But Ashley and Tom took him to an urgent care center in Greenlee, only to be told that their CT scanner wasn't available that day. But Ashley wasn't willing to take any risks. They went straight to the North Colorado Medical Center the next morning, and they got a scan that showed there was no bleeding, so that was good news at first. But then a startling discovery was made. Blake was diagnosed with moderate hydrocephalus, and this is a buildup of excess fluid in his brain. Ashley, who expected everything would be fine, was of course devastated. The imaging revealed so much fluid that it was hard to even make out Blake's brain tissue. Doctors at the Children's Hospital in Denver assured them that Blake was stable and just needed regular checkups. But Ashley couldn't shake the feeling that something more was going on. She worked in the medical industry, and she had seen way too many cases where someone did not act fast enough and it got worse. So she was determined to find answers. Ashley sought a second opinion in Arizona in January of 2010. After thorough testing, they learned that Blake was about a year behind in his neurological development. He would need a series of surgeries in both Denver and Arizona to manage the excess fluid. At one point, the pressure even led to a fracture in Blake's skull, followed by bouts of vomiting and inconsolable crying. And I cannot even imagine that poor little boy, everything he had to go through at such a young age. And ultimately, the doctors placed a shunt in his brain to drain the fluid and relieve the pressure. Now, I do not share my personal experiences in these videos that much, but this case really hit close to home because in 2013, I personally had a spinal fluid issue. And mine was a decrease in the fluid in my brain, not an increase. But I can tell you right now, the pain was excruciating. I was unable to sit up for 6 weeks and I could not walk. And I didn't think it was ever going to get better, but thankfully mine did. But the pain was unbearable, so I can only imagine Blake's suffering and that his was way more severe than mine. Expensive too. The medical bills quickly piled up for Ashley and Tom, and by the end of 2010, the family's medical bills had actually skyrocketed to over $1 million. That is insane. Navigating the insurance coverage and all their limitations added another layer of stress. And I'm sure you know that this is an issue that continues to anger many Americans. This has become even more evident after the high-profile murder of Brian Thompson, the United Healthcare CEO. But despite the crushing financial burden, Ashley's main focus remained on Blake's recovery. She even found connections with other parents through the Pediatric Hydrocephalus Foundation, parents who understood the struggle all too well. In an interview with the Greenlee Tribune, Ashley spoke candidly about the challenges her family had faced. She said, "You never expect it to be your child," explaining how the experience gave her a deep empathy for other parents in similar situations. She also opened up about how Blake's ongoing medical issues had actually strained her marriage, both emotionally and financially. Meanwhile, Ashley's other children, Jolie and Madeline, had felt this shift in focus towards their little brother, and Ashley admitted it wasn't easy ensuring that all of her kids felt equally supported. Still, Ashley and Tom emerged stronger as a couple, with Tom saying that "I'm so blessed to have Ashley," telling the Greenlee Tribune that he said he did try to play the blind card, but Ashley stepped in and said, "This is what needs to be done so it doesn't get worse." It wasn't an easy road for any of them, but their resilience and commitment to one another kept them moving forward despite all of these obstacles. As for Blake, there was finally a light at the end of the tunnel. After enduring 7 surgeries and many setbacks, including a hernia caused by his shunt, he began to thrive. Over that past year, he had undergone physical, occupational, and speech therapies, and was now chatting away with his parents and his sisters. In the Greenlee Tribune, Ashley also spoke about her ambition to support other families that were facing the same obstacles. She intended to start a local support group at the Children's Hospital and planned to testify before Congress that fall, and she did that, by the way. She was hoping her family story could help to better shape awareness and policies. That is definitely something I commend her for. That is so brave, fighting for herself and other families. Blake's long-term outlook actually looked very good. Even though he would always need monitoring and care for his hydrocephalus, doctors believed he could still lead a normal life, maybe even play sports. The family affectionately teased him about his big head, calling him Hydro, and they felt grateful that they had the resources to pay for his treatments. And that's what Ashley said. That's why I'm glad it's him rather than another child. Because, Ashley did work at the hospital, she did have some benefits, and other families did not. Even though it was very, very expensive. Out of this world expensive, which I know so many people can relate to. In 2010, the weight of Blake's diagnosis and the endless medical hurdles began to wear on Ashley and Tom. While coping with their son's hydrocephalus, Ashley sought mental health care in Greenlee as well, trying to manage the stress that went far beyond those hospital visits. That summer, something unexpected happened. Ashley lost her job as a respiratory therapist at the Northern Colorado Medical Center, and she believed that this termination was unjust, especially given how devoted she was to her family, her son, and his health, while also caring for patients professionally. Refusing to accept the situation quietly, Ashley hired a lawyer, and she sued the medical center for wrongful termination. After a period of legal back and forth, she reached a settlement. Though it was a painful chapter, Ashley's strength was really evident, and before long, she found a new position as a respiratory therapist at the Northern Colorado Rehabilitation Hospital. In the midst of these difficulties, Blake's ongoing care and her professional setbacks, Ashley found herself questioning her husband's faithfulness. She had suspicions that he might be cheating, which led her to confide in someone from her past, Jedediah Pepping. He was a brief high school fling from back in 1999. They stumbled back into each other's lives in the summer of 2011 via Facebook. Oh, it's the story we always hear. Good old Facebook, reconnecting you with your past, even if you don't want it. And their renewed friendship quickly turned into more. The texts and emails went back and forth, and then the two of them finally met in person. Jedediah actually came over to Ashley and Tom's home while Tom was away on a trip. And that evening, Ashley did nothing more than talk with Jedediah, but the conversation marked a turning point. She confided in him that she was leaning towards filing for divorce. Ashley and Jedediah's relationship got more intense, even though there was the looming threat of them being discovered. And for some people, that's the thrill of it. And one night, during one of their meetups in a parking lot, Tom unexpectedly showed up because he had his own suspicions, and his turned out to be right. According to Jedediah, Tom's aggressive confrontation rattled him so much that he locked his car doors and rolled up the windows once Ashley got out of the car. But to be fair, this man was there with Tom's wife. So I think the confrontation was warranted. But still, after this confrontation, Ashley and Jedediah continued to see one another. They even spent a night together at a hotel in Longmont. But shortly afterward, Jedediah noticed a change in Ashley's behavior, describing her as spiraling emotionally, his words. She couldn't shake her own insecurities that Tom was cheating on her, even though she hadn't found any proof, and she was actually cheating on him. But to get him to admit he was cheating, she set up a fake email address under Jedediah's name and sent Tom taunting messages, claiming Ashley had said that Jedediah was better in bed. I wasn't exactly sure what the point of this was, but I'm highlighting it to show that Ashley was definitely dealing with a lot of emotions and wasn't exactly making the best choices at this time. Ashley confided in her mom about her feelings that Tom was having an affair and made several comments about wanting to make him jealous. But Jenna warned her daughter that using, cheating and being with another man and revenge sex, as they say, is not a way to cope with her fears. I think communication would be the best course of action in a case like this. And ultimately, Ashley confessed in her infidelity to Tom, and eventually the affair ended. And despite the emotional turmoil that it did bring, Ashley and Tom worked to rebuild their marriage once again. According to Tom, the stress in Ashley's life began to affect her mental health and her well-being. Her moods, which were once very stable, became erratic and unpredictable. On most days, Tom observed her as being up and constantly restless, fidgeting, being anxious, and unable to unwind. It's like she wasn't able to calm herself, calm her mind or her body. It's like she was racing in all different directions. But her high energy days were then followed by very severe lows. And during the depressive episodes, Ashley's insecurities grew more and more intense. She would question her ability to be a parent, her worth as a wife, her career choices, and her very identity. There were days when even getting out of bed felt impossible for her. And I know that it's easy to judge someone that we don't know or we don't understand, but by the way this sounds, it seems like Ashley was going through a very difficult time, and I feel really bad for her. Tom was really worried about his wife, and she finally got help, and she was prescribed anti-anxiety medications and some mood stabilizers to manage the frequent panic attacks. But Tom had a growing suspicion that she might not be taking her medications as directed. What he didn't know was that Ashley had been secretly seeing multiple doctors and sometimes doubling up on her prescriptions. She was hoping that the medications would dull these overwhelming emotions that she couldn't escape. Even with the medications, Ashley was still overwhelmed by feelings of failure. She even wrote a letter to Tom, apologizing for what she saw as her shortcomings. She told him how much internal pain she was enduring and how impossible it felt to keep going. In her own words, she had failed at everything, being a wife, a mother, a professional, and she felt like she simply couldn't handle the weight anymore. Even though she underwent the procedure to have her tubes tied 3 years earlier, Ashley had the suspicion in December of 2011 that she was pregnant. Something just felt off. She took a pregnancy test and it confirmed her suspicions. She shared this with Tom and both of them saw it as a renewed sense of hope despite all of their challenges in their marriage. The prospect of having a new baby offered them a glimpse of something very optimistic for their future. Ashley was concerned about how her medications were going to affect the fetus, so she made the decision to stop taking all of her prescribed medications, including clonazepam, Seroquel, and Adderall. These were drugs used to manage her anxiety, her obsessive-compulsive disorder, and bipolar tendencies. The sudden adjustment to her life without these stabilizing medications added another layer of emotional and physical strain. But Ashley and Tom remained focused on celebrating the new chapter ahead. If you're not aware, going off drugs like this can have severe mental consequences, and it's usually recommended to only taper off and to do so under the guidance of a medical professional. But Ashley felt confident she knew her body well and that she would be okay. So to ring in the new year in 2012, Ashley and Tom planned a simple New Year's Eve gathering at their home. A few close friends, family members, and an assortment of party drinks, including a mini keg, Jello shots, and sweet but potent jungle juice. It was supposed to be a relaxing celebration, a way to welcome the new year surrounded by those that they loved. In attendance were Ashley's mom, Jenna, her stepdad, Joel, her colleague and friend, Andrea Morganson, and Andrea's husband, Derek, Tom's parents, Jim and Anna, plus various uncles, aunts, and cousins. And of course, 3-year-old Blake, 5-year-old Jolie, and 9-year-old Madeline. And it was shaping up to be a great time. However, that morning of December 31st, it started on a tense, emotional note. Tom heard muffled sobs coming from the bathroom and he found Ashley sitting on the toilet with tears streaming down her face. She told him that she was bleeding and she believed she had just had a miscarriage. This wasn't the first time this happened to Ashley. During the past 9 months, she was convinced on 3 separate occasions that she was pregnant, only to be certain she had miscarried each time. But whether those beliefs were tied to her previous procedure or another issue remained unclear, meaning they weren't sure whether she actually tested and was pregnant or if she just had felt pregnant and then went on to get her cycle and then thought it was a miscarriage. But what was certain was that she was very sad and worried. Both Ashley and Tom were, even as they tried to embrace the night of lighthearted festivities. This is quite an emotional roller coaster for both sides, knowing all Tom knew about Ashley's mental health and all of their present struggles, and of course, for Ashley, who was already dealing with it all. Each time this happened, Tom had repeatedly begged Ashley to please go see a doctor. He was worried about whether there was something wrong with the way her procedure was done, but Ashley wouldn't budge. She insisted she understood her body better than anyone else. And that morning, she broke down and confided in Tom. She told him she regretted getting the procedure 3 years ago, and through tears, she said she felt pushed into the procedure by her mom, and now She really wanted more children. Tom said he shared her same feelings. He wished they could grow their family. And they spent most of that morning and afternoon browsing online for reversal options, clinging to the hope that the procedure might be undone. But they had to put their grief and research on pause for the party. Once everyone was there, it seemed like they were having a great time. Music was playing, drinks were flowing, and Tom and Ashley even danced together to their wedding song, 18th Floor Balcony by Blue October. And they did this right in front of everyone. It was a really cute moment for them to share. And it showed the love they had for one another, even after all of these years and what they've gone through. But some could tell that behind the smiles, there was tension between Tom and Ashley's mother, Jenna. Recall the conversation Tom had with Ashley earlier that day, admitting she felt pressured into getting the procedure done because her mother had insisted she should. And now, Tom was left dealing with the aftermath and all of Ashley's emotions. But Ashley didn't seem distressed or distraught over what happened that morning. She even casually mentioned it to her friend Andrea, kind of almost in passing, as they grabbed some jungle juice in the kitchen. Just a quick mention that she might have had a miscarriage that morning. But Andrea knew that Ashley had 3 beautiful children that she absolutely adored and that she was already very grateful for them. So she didn't feel like Ashley was devastated or anything like that. Frustrated, yes, but it didn't seem that big of a deal the way that Ashley mentioned it. When the clock struck midnight and the ball dropped, the party erupted in hugs, toasts, and kisses as people celebrated the start of the new year. Tom's parents, along with Andrea and Derek, left shortly afterward. And when Ashley was saying goodbye, she told Andrea that she should make plans to hang out in the future, and she seemed in good spirits. But after this, Tom noticed Ashley coming out of the bedroom wearing her coat, and he asked, "Where are you going?" She said she was just stepping outside for a smoke. Now, when he pressed her asking her what she was going to be smoking, Ashley kind of grinned and she was kind of acting a little shy and she said, "I don't know." At that point, Tom knew that Ashley planned on smoking some pot. And he disapproved of this, especially given the circumstances of her just having suffered a miscarriage and the fact that she was off her medication, and because both his job and her job did random drug testing. Remember, he worked as a corrections officer and she worked in a medical center. This was another tipping point because it was Ashley's uncle that offered her the pot. And Tom was already frustrated with Ashley's mom, so this compounded it. He felt like her family had this tendency to encourage her into bad decisions that she would later regret. Plus, in 2012, marijuana was illegal in Colorado. Tom was pissed, to put it lightly, and he yelled at Ashley's family. He even cursed at them and told them to leave his house. Then he stormed into the bedroom and he slammed the door behind him. Ashley seemed pretty unfazed by his outburst. She hugged her parents goodbye and she casually mentioned plans to get together for a Super Bowl party that she was throwing the following month. Jenna and Joel, though they were annoyed by Tom's behavior, didn't really think much of it at the time. It wasn't the first time that they clashed and he had gotten angry at them, especially when they had been drinking and under stress. Ashley waved goodbye to her parents, and as Jenna and Joel drove away, they were still processing the tension between them and Tom. So Jenna actually texted her son-in-law, and she told him to please calm down because her grandchildren were in the house. What Joel and Jenna didn't know at the time was that as they made their way down that street towards home, inside that house, Tom was making a call to 911 at 12:50 a.m. Let's listen to a portion of that call now.
911, what's the address of your emergency? My wife is over there! No! Sure. Honey, are you there? Okay, can you go open the door and let the officers in? Okay. Okay, we're gonna help her. I need you to go open the door.
That was really hard to listen to, not just because of how emotional most 911 calls are, but because you can barely make out what Tom is saying. He's screaming, he's sobbing, he's begging Ashley to stay with him. But if you could hear what he was saying, he was reporting that Ashley had inflicted a shot to herself. And there was just absolute desperation in his voice. Tom was begging the dispatcher for help, repeatedly shouting at Ashley to stay alive. And at one point, he put the phone down to help her. And then their 9-year-old daughter, Madeline, picked the phone up. The dispatcher calmly instructed the little girl to open the front door to let the police and paramedics inside. And in the background, Tom's voice could be heard pleading with Ashley to hold on, saying, "No, Ashley, no. You're staying here. You're staying here. We've got a son that needs us. We've got 2 girls that want us here." And he kept urging her to stay alive for their children. Minutes later, police arrived, and Tom was then pulled away from Ashley's body, and he was covered in her blood. It covered the left side of his white undershirt. They escorted him outside, and he immediately texted his mother asking her to please come back to the house. So his parents turned around to come back. Meanwhile, Jenna and Joel, who were still on the road, heard sirens and saw flashing lights heading towards Ashley's house, and that's when they got a bad feeling. So they quickly turned around and headed back to her house along with Ashley's uncle. When they arrived, they were met with a chaotic scene, and when they saw Tom standing outside and Ashley being taken away on a stretcher into an ambulance, they yelled at Tom, saying that they knew he had tried to kill her. At this point, Ashley's mother, her stepdad, and her uncle were following the ambulance to the hospital where doctors were going to work to assess her condition. It was clear that she had suffered a traumatic brain injury, a very severe one, and her prognosis was not good. Unfortunately, Ashley sustained too much damage, and there was nothing they could do to save her. Her parents were there. They were by her side as she slipped away, and they held her hand, saying their final goodbyes. Tom wasn't permitted to be with them. Instead, he was taken to the Evans Police Department for questioning, still in his bloody clothes. Tom was interviewed by Detective Rita Wolf. And in this interview, Tom was visibly upset. He was tearfully explaining that things had actually been going so well between him and Ashley, despite the struggles that they had faced. He told Detective Wolf about the events leading up to the tragedy, the miscarriage, the argument over Ashley wanting to smoke pot at their New Year's Eve party, and the tension between them. Tom said that he told Ashley he didn't want her to get high, and she cursed at him and insisted she could do what she wanted. He claimed he just shrugged it off and told her, "Okay, fine, do what you want." Tom described the moments leading up to the shooting. He said he went into the bedroom to get ready for bed. He was in the bedroom closet changing his clothes when he heard the unmistakable sound of a gun being cocked. He explained that Ashley kept a 9mm Taurus either under her mattress on her side of the bed or at her side table or in her purse. When he looked out the closet, he saw Ashley crouch low beside the bed on her side, and then suddenly he heard a pop. Tom said he saw smoke and then rushed to Ashley's side. He knew right away what happened, and he could see that she was wounded in the head. So he grabbed her head, attempting to stop the bleeding, and tried to check for a pulse. Then he grabbed her phone to call 911. Tom recounted trying to wake Ashley up, speaking to her and pleading with her to stay alive, telling her that he was there for her. However, Detective Wolf and the other officers weren't just there to get Tom's perspective on what happened. They were there because they had to be sure that he didn't have anything to do with this. They began questioning him on the details of his account, sensing that there might be more to the story than what he was revealing. To get more information out of him, Detective Wolf told Tom that the officers didn't think the wound in Ashley's head was in a place where she could have done it herself. And this is when he got really angry. He was like, "Bullshit," getting right in the detective's face, even slamming his water bottle again and again multiple times on the table. All the while, Detective Wolf is telling him to calm down, even asking him if he's always this upset. Like, is this the way you usually get? And he's like, "You're accusing me of killing my wife." Here's that interaction now.
That wound on the back of her head isn't where she could do it herself, Tom. It is not. It is not.
I mean, you can tell by the way he's reacting to this detective accusing him of murder that he is very passionately denying it. It's interesting because sometimes if a suspect doesn't show emotion, then they're deemed suspicious. And then if they do show emotion, whether it's sadness or in this case, sadness and anger, they're also looked at as suspicious. This is when Detective Wolf reveals that they got some information from a witness. Her name was Kathy Glover. She was Ashley and Tom's next-door neighbor who lived to the right of them, and she had also called 911. And she provided a critical piece of information to police. She revealed that her daughter's friend, Cheryl Arrigo, who lived across the street from Tom and Ashley, had actually called her. claiming she heard disturbing sounds coming from the Fallis home. According to Cheryl, she heard a woman screaming, "Get off me, get off me," and then a man's voice begging Ashley not to leave him, followed by a loud pop. Wolf then confronted Tom, pressing him about what Cheryl allegedly heard, and Tom denied these accusations, insisting that he was not even near Ashley and nothing like that happened. He mentioned that one of his neighbors had even threatened to harm their dog because it had been barking. So he was like, which neighbor is this? The one that threatened to call the police on our dog and threatened to harm them? Because that would mean maybe they had something against them and they were just saying this, just making it up. But as the questioning intensified, Tom became increasingly distressed. He was cursing and, of course, adamantly denying he had anything to do with this and maintaining his innocence. But then there was something else. Detective Wolf couldn't help but notice scratches on Tom's chest during this interview. Now, I'm going to show you a picture of this. When asked about them, Tom said that he had recently shaved his chest for the very first time and blamed the redness, the marks, and the scratches on irritation and just pulling at his shirt in the stressful moments after Ashley's death. But Wolf wasn't buying it. The scratches to her seemed more like something that Ashley might have left during a struggle for her life. Tom flat out denied it. He insisted, "I would never kill the mother of my children, the woman that I wanted to have another baby with." Tom wanted to know what was going on with his wife. He begged to be able to go see her. Hours were going by, and that is when Detective Wolf finally gives him the devastating news that she didn't make it. And to me, it was so matter of fact. It's like your wife didn't make it. And Tom's world had crumbled. He broke down in tears, his head in his hands, and he kept yelling, "She was breathing when I was holding her. She was breathing." Still, the evidence at the scene raised further questions. Divorce papers were sitting on a dresser. Picture frames appeared to have fallen from the walls, and Tom admitted that he was angry earlier with Ashley's mom, Jenna, and he just resented the way Ashley would keep listening to her. So he went into the bedroom, he slammed the door, which could have made pictures fall or things get rustled about. But he said that was the extent of it. And at the end of this interview, Tom was released without any charges filed against him. Now, Ashley's parents were, of course, distraught. They were overcome with grief, but they were also pretty stunned when they heard that Tom was insisting that Ashley had done this to herself. It didn't make sense to them. They didn't believe it for a second. In their eyes, there was no doubt about it. Tom was responsible. Jenna told the police that she had seen Ashley just 7 minutes before Tom's 911 call, and Ashley had been happily planning a Super Bowl party. She explained that Ashley and Tom's oldest daughter, Madeline, emailed her after they left, asking her to come back because her parents were fighting. Jenna said she always felt that Tom had a nasty temper, going from 0 to 100 in no time at all, and she had been worried since day one that his anger would explode, and that Tom had made every family gathering a nightmare, turning things into fights or screaming matches. And according to Jenna, Tom's job as a corrections officer was a perfect fit for his controlling behavior. She said that he loved having the authority over other people. Ashley's stepdad, Joel, was equally sure that Tom had shot Ashley, convinced that he'd snapped in a rage after Ashley said she wanted to smoke a joint with her family. To Jenna and Joel, Ashley's death wasn't just a tragedy. It was a murder. As the news of her death spread, it left her friends and family in shock and disbelief. Her friend and coworker, Andrea, who had been at that New Year's Eve party, could not make sense of it. Ashley had been so happy just hours before this, dancing with Tom, laughing, having fun with her children, that she knew she loved so much. The idea that Ashley would have chosen to do this to herself didn't sit right with her either, which left only one other possibility, that it was Tom. He was the only other person in that house at the time aside from their 3 young children, and he would have had access to the gun. Actually, there were 2 guns in that home. You might have heard Tom mention this in the interview with the detective. He mentioned that his gun usually wasn't loaded, but he did own one. And he didn't think Ashley kept her gun loaded either, but he wasn't sure. To do their due diligence, the Evans Police Department detective Lisa Duffy interviewed Ashley and Tom's young daughters, Jolie and Madeline, at a Kids Place, a child advocacy center, shortly after Ashley's death. The goal was to make the children feel as comfortable as possible while giving law enforcement and professionals the important information they needed for the investigation. Detective Duffy said that the little girls were confused and scared during the interview, and they didn't understand why they were being taken away by two strangers. Both of them asked to see their mother, which truly made me very sad. But Detective Duffy explained that she needed to speak with them first. And during this interview, the little 5-year-old Jolie mentioned seeing a pink gun and hearing 3 gunshots. However, this statement actually conflicted with the physical evidence because Ashley only had 1 gunshot wound to her head and there were no other bullets found at the scene. The little girl also said that she went up to her parents' room that night because she hadn't told them goodnight, and she mentioned hearing a bump, smelling something like smoke, and seeing her mother's face covered in blood, with her father holding her mother. Additionally, she described her mother's eyes as closed, saying it's like she was sleeping or something. I couldn't help but think wow, these poor children. I feel so bad that they have to go through all this. Now, in a separate interview, Ashley and Tom's other daughter, the 9-year-old Madeline, told police she heard her mom say, "Oh my God," when she went to her parents' bedroom, and then she saw blood on the wall and her dad holding her mother. Both girls said they didn't know what happened to their mom, but they did share that their dad told them it was an accident. Now, at the end of one of these interviews, Jolie walked out with Detective Duffy and said, "I hope I can see my mom today. I really want to see her." And that pulls at my heart. It's so sad. I just can't imagine the sadness when these 2 little girls are informed that they will never see their mom again. Let me bring you to the crime scene and give you details on that. When the first responders arrived, their body cam footage actually caught some of the chaos. The home was a 2-level home with a primary bedroom up the stairs, and they had 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms and a 3-car garage. It even had an indoor-outdoor fireplace where you could see through to the backyard. In Tom and Ashley's room, they had big wedding pictures just blown up right above their bed, which was in the middle of the room. The bed was still entirely made from earlier that morning, decorative pillows and all. The drapes were closed and the room was tidy, except for a couple pictures and frames that were on the floor. They appeared to have come from a dresser since they had the little stands on the back that were used to prop them up as opposed to a hook and a nail. A purse sat on the left side of the bed, and on that left side is where Ashley's body was found, between the bed and the window. And there was also a freestanding jewelry cabinet on that side and a side table. Moving in closer, you can see 2 distinct bloodstains on the carpeted floor. One is bigger than the other and a bit smeared, and the other one is right next to the gun that was still on the floor. Now, of course, it's a bit too intense to show this, but there was a blood spatter pattern on the wall behind where Ashley was found, and it had this distinct shape. It was almost like it cascaded in a curve, first as a stream and then in droplets. And this was from Ashley's head when the shot occurred. A bullet hole was found to the right of this area, and the bullet had gone through the wall after it hit her and created a hole right through to the outside. The gun had blood on it, and there was also a bit of hair left behind on the carpet right near it. When the medics and the officers arrived, their body cam showed them racing to get to Ashley. Once inside her room, you can see a TV on. I mention this because I presume it had audio, which means there could be extra noise, extra voices coming from that room that night, during and even after the shooting. Now, medics are kneeling next to her between the bed and the wall rendering aid. They finally picked her up and carried her out the front door, and there was still a Christmas wreath hanging from it. At Ashley's funeral 5 days after her death, Tom delivered a eulogy, but the unease was only growing. Andrea's husband, Derek, couldn't shake the feeling that Tom kind of seemed off. Instead of appearing like a grieving husband mourning his wife's death, Tom kind of came across as stressed and not emotional. And when he spoke about Ashley, his words did not carry the love that you would expect from someone who had just lost their partner. Instead, he kind of made some odd comments. He called Ashley demanding, and he admitted he didn't always have the patience for her. Now, I'm sure that he was under a lot of stress, and everyone acts differently dealing with trauma. But I can say, yeah, that does sound a little bit off, especially kind of insulting her. And Ashley's parents were floored hearing Tom practically degrade their daughter like that at her funeral. It was like a slap in the face. Instead of honoring Ashley's memory, Tom's words only deepened their suspicions that he was the reason this happened. Something about his behavior just didn't sit right. So let's go back to just 4 days after Ashley was rushed to the hospital and the medical examiner completed the autopsy. And in that report, her death was ruled as self-inflicted. And by March, this case was actually officially closed. Dr. James Wilkerson, the medical examiner who performed Ashley's autopsy, found no traces of marijuana in her system. However, her blood alcohol level was 0.088, and this was just above the legal driving limit, so she was pretty intoxicated, and there were trace amounts of benzodiazepines in her urine, and this was consistent with her prescribed medication clonazepam, which is used predominantly in epilepsy, panic disorders, and mania. Ashley was taking it to control her mood swings and her bipolar tendencies. But according to Tom, Ashley told him she stopped taking all of her medication cold turkey without any medical supervision because she found out she was pregnant, which seemed to align with what the autopsy findings were, since there was such a low amount in her system. And the other medications weren't found in her system at all, so it looks like she did stop taking them. However, when the crime scene investigators came, they did find prescription bottles, and they were in her purse and on the nightstand. Dr. Wilkinson also discovered that Ashley's tubal ligation had failed on one side, which now explains why she was still able to conceive, why she would get pregnant, but also why she would probably have a number of miscarriages. And that is very heartbreaking. And she had been pregnant. However, the pregnancy was extremely early. It was barely a week along, based on the low levels of the pregnancy hormones in her urine. The reports from Dr. Wilkinson and the crime scene investigators backed the conclusion that Ashley had taken her own life. Tom told investigators that she had expressed thoughts about doing this to herself in the past, and he mentioned that it actually ran in the family. The two of her close family members had died the same way. Her maternal grandmother and uncle on her mother's side, so her mother's mom and her mother's brother. And it was something that he really worried about. Now, these details painted a picture that seemed to satisfy the investigators, but not everyone was convinced that this case was as clear-cut as it appeared, especially not Ashley's parents. They were adamant that Tom had killed Ashley, going so far as to call it the blue wall of silence. Now, this was in reference to their belief that the police were protecting Tom because of his job as a corrections officer. That's interesting, right? Now, this was a pretty bold accusation, but one they stood by, even though the Evans Police Department, which handled the case, and the Weld County Sheriff's Office, where Tom worked, were separate entities. Still, Jenna and Joel couldn't help but feel that the investigation wasn't handled objectively, and that it was too quickly ruled as not having any foul play involved. Their conviction stemmed from more than just a suspicion. It was rooted in who they knew Ashley was to them. The woman that they knew was full of life, and nothing about her demeanor in the days leading up to her death suggested she wanted to die. Most importantly, Jenna and Joel pointed to Ashley's role as a mother. Ashley's son Blake, we already know, he was living with hydrocephalus, and he required extra care and attention. Ashley had gone out of her way and done so much to make sure that he was thriving, and he had all the care that he needed. So in the days following Ashley's death, Jenna sent several emails to one of the sergeants at Evans Police Department demanding that they, quote, do their job, end quote. And apparently this wasn't Jenna's first time clashing with law enforcement over a loved one's death. When her brother, Michael Schmitzer, died in a self-inflicted shooting in Park County, Colorado in 1999, Jenna initially believed that his wife had actually killed him. That's interesting. So Jenna pushed for a deeper investigation, but eventually she had to accept the fact that her brother had taken his own life. For Jenna, though, this was different. This was her daughter. They were so close. She knew her so well, and the pieces just didn't fit together. And as Jenna watched this case close in just 2 months, her frustration only grew. But then there was the aftermath for Tom. He struggled to adjust to losing Ashley, so much so he actually continued to text her cell phone for months, writing messages as though they were still having conversations. And this might sound odd, but it is a known coping mechanism. And in these messages, he expressed how much he missed Ashley, how much him and the kids missed her, how hard life had become without her, and how deeply he loved her. To help with his grief, Tom also began jotting down notes just days after she died, reflecting on his emotions and the challenges he was facing as a widowed father. He also purchased a cemetery plot right next to hers, so that one day they could be reunited. Additionally, Tom had his wedding band engraved with the words "for eternity," a gesture that seemed to mark a commitment to the memory of the relationship that no matter what happened, not even death, could separate them. All of these things seem very touching. Tom initially even tried to return to his job as a corrections officer, but eventually he decided it was not possible. He said his focus needed to be on raising his 3 young children, and that it just wasn't right for him in that moment because he wasn't in the emotional state to continue working at that time. And about 18 months after Ashley's death, Tom moved away from Colorado altogether and took the kids to Bloomington, Indiana, where he planned to attend college so that he could hopefully increase his earning potential now that he had only one income, and then he could truly give the children what they needed. Meanwhile, Jenna and Joel remained convinced that Tom was responsible for their daughter's death, but they maintained contact with him because they wanted to be with their grandchildren. They wanted a relationship with Ashley's children. Joel explained that their love for the kids outweighed their feelings towards Tom. And though it was difficult to have the children living in another state, they made it work out because of the love that they had for Ashley and the children that she left behind. Jenna and Joel still felt the investigation into Ashley's death left too many questions unanswered. When they received the official case report, they were frustrated by what they saw as an incomplete account of what happened. Jenna described it as something a high schooler could have written. Fair enough. Ashley's parents were relentless in their pursuit for justice. They contacted local politicians, they reached out to law enforcement agencies, and engaged with the district attorney's office, pressing them to reopen Ashley's case and conduct a more thorough investigation. However, this doesn't usually happen unless new evidence is there to consider. But it didn't sway them. They spoke out with various news outlets, and they highlighted what they believed to be a serious flaw in the handling of this case. In their point of view, the police had rushed to label Ashley's death as self-inflicted without sufficient evidence to support this conclusion. One of their biggest issues was how Tom was treated that night. They wanted to know why he was never separated from his parents or the children. He was allowed to talk to them, and why he wasn't treated like a suspect. But then again, Tom wasn't even able to be by his wife's side in the hospital because he was fully cooperating with the police and providing a statement. But Ashley's parents felt that the fact that Tom's hands weren't preserved for evidence testing was a problem. What if they would have had gunshot residue on them? Which I totally understand. That's a valid question. And I think most of us as parents, and even just as loved ones, would fight for something we believed in. So I don't blame them at all. I'd probably do the exact same thing until I exhausted every avenue possible. And that's what they were doing. They also weren't happy with the 3-hour interrogation by Evans Police Department with Tom. They felt like that was too lenient. Tom just kept saying, "I didn't do this." But they felt like he wasn't being questioned the way that a real suspect would be in a case like this. But I couldn't help but think, he wasn't a suspect. See, they hadn't even really gotten to investigate in the first few hours. Everything had just started to come together. And the evidence hadn't pointed in that direction. As far as they were concerned, the medical examiner had made their ruling, self-inflicted. And without a homicide being ruled on paper, the detective's hands are tied. There's nothing to investigate. So no suspects would even be considered. But Jenna and Joel had a hunch that Tom's dad, Jim, who used to be an athletic director at the University of Northern Colorado, might have used some of his connections to help Tom out. All of this only added fuel to their fire to keep them pushing for the case to get a closer look, so that hopefully the truth could be uncovered. They reached out to Fox 31 reporter Justin Joseph, hoping that he might take their concerns seriously because it seemed like no one else was. And this is when things get even more interesting. When Justin heard Ashley's story, he felt compelled to look into it further. It seemed clear from what he was being told from Ashley's parents that there was enough overlooked in this investigation to warrant a closer look, and he felt that he had a personal responsibility to help Jenna and Joel dig deeper. He said, "I had a source with law enforcement who called me and said something isn't right about this case." So for months, Justin spoke to neighbors of Tom and Ashley who initially had spoken to the police, and over the course of a year, Justin worked tirelessly to track down witnesses and interviewed officers. And finally, in April of 2014, Justin thought he stumbled upon some new evidence that could crack this case wide open again. They spoke to Nick Glover. Now, he was a teenager at the time of Ashley's death, and he lived next door to Tom and Ashley on the right. I mentioned his mother, Kathy, earlier. She was the one who said that one of her daughter's friends that lived across the street from Tom and Ashley heard someone scream, get off me," before hearing a popping sound. Well, Kathy's son, Nick, was playing video games with a friend of his when his mom came in with her daughter, his sister, and informed him that something bad happened next door. So they all crawled to a window and they looked outside. And what Nick saw was apparently missing from police reports. but now he was telling the reporter Justin all the details. While looking out his bedroom window in a crouched pose, Nick said he saw Tom walk outside where his parents were standing, and Tom was yelling loudly. His parents were motioning for him to calm down. Nick claims that he heard Tom say, "Oh my God, I can't believe I did it," 3 or 4 times. When Tom's parents asked what he was saying, Nick claimed he heard Tom respond, "I shot her." Well, this wasn't all. Nick said that Evans police officer Michael Yates had indeed taken his statement about hearing Tom essentially confessing to shooting Ashley, and he watched him write everything down in his notebook during the early morning hours of New Year's Day, January 1st, 2012. Well, that seemed odd since Justin had access to all the case notes and noticed that Officer Yates' report did not include Nick's version of hearing Tom confess. This definitely seemed like a deliberate attempt to cover something up. As Justin continued digging, he spoke to Nick's mom, Kathy, and she told him what I already told you, that she received a call from her daughter's friend Cheryl, who said she heard Ashley say, get off me," but she said something else. She said that Cheryl said, "You better call 911 because your neighbor's husband just shot her." But here's the thing. When Justin reviewed the police report, he discovered another discrepancy. Officer Yates had written that Kathy told him Cheryl said Ashley shot herself, not that she had been shot by Tom. So this directly contradicted Kathy's version of what she said. Even more troubling, Justin found that no one had even followed up with Cheryl to verify what she had really heard that night. Justin was disturbed by the inconsistencies between Nick and Kathy's statements and the official report regarding Ashley's death. So he reached out to the Evans Police Department chief, Rick Brandt, for clarification and to present his findings. Remember I said that unless new evidence is discovered, cases are usually not reopened. Well, in this case, the chief decided there was enough new evidence to warrant a deeper look into the investigation. On April 8th, 2014, Chief Brandt held a press conference announcing the new witness statements and the allegations of misconduct against an Evans police officer. And this was the reason he was going to reopen this case. But because this officer in question was still employed by the department, Chief Brandt revealed that a third-party investigation would be conducted by the Fort Collins Police Services and the Loveland Police Department. At the time, 2 years following Ashley's death, Tom Fallis was still living in Bloomington, Indiana, and he was attending Indiana University to complete his degree. He received a call from his father. His father said he should contact the Evans Police Department as soon as possible, and Tom wasted no time at all. During a lecture, he stepped out to make that call, and the officer informed him that new evidence had been uncovered in the investigation into his wife's death, leading to reopening her case. When Tom was asked what the new evidence was, the officer declined to provide him any details. Tom was really worried, and he later reflected on that moment, and he said he knew 2 things. 1, he needed an excellent attorney, and 2, that Ashley's parents had finally managed to apply enough pressure to get their way. Following the announcement that the case was going to be reopened, Jenna and Joel went on a press tour to discuss everything about Ashley's case. They went on shows like The Kelly File with Megyn Kelly. They went on HLN. And during the HLN interview, Tom was actually referred to as a cop. I've also seen other news videos calling him a former deputy, and that was not his official title at all. He was a corrections officer. It seemed as though the media felt that labeling him as a police officer would get a lot more attention on their segments and also make for a better story. But it just wasn't true. The panel of experts featured on the HLN show included Jenna and Joel's attorney, who discussed the idea that for a mother to have taken her own life, she must have deeply hated her children. Saying that, Ashley wouldn't do this because she didn't hate her children, but all I could think of is yikes. I mean, that comment just seems really insensitive. And I know that most of us know that self-inflicted death is very complicated. And to make a blanket statement like that, even if she wasn't trying to apply it to Ashley, but maybe to other people who have done this, it seems just flat out wrong. Meanwhile, the reporters focused on a flashlight that they suspected Tom could have used to beat Ashley. Now, I didn't mention this when I was showing the crime scene because I wanted to get to this point and explain it, but this flashlight can be seen in the crime scene photos. It's right here on the bedroom floor, right next to one of the bloodstains on the carpet where Ashley died. All of this speculation really reminded me of social media today and so many false accusations and assumptions that really have nothing to do with the truth. That flashlight was not part of the crime scene at all. It wasn't Tom's or Ashley's. It was simply left behind by an officer who had responded to the scene and bent down to administer life-saving measures to Ashley. These crime scene photos were clearly taken thereafter when Ashley was no longer present, and this is just one example of people creating their own narratives. Now, Ashley's family also organized a protest on May 31st outside the Evans Police Department. They were demanding justice for Ashley. One thing's for sure, they really do know how to get eyes on them, and they know how to gain a lot of attention from the public. During this time, Tom struggled. He was struggling with all of the emotional fallout of being labeled as a murderer, and he was expressing frustration with the media coverage, particularly the fact that these talking heads continued to incorrectly label him as a police officer, and others who speculated about what happened that night when they had no knowledge of any of the official details. Now, the reporter, Justin Joseph, who had uncovered this new evidence, he traveled to Indiana in an attempt to speak with Tom, and when he approached him outside of his own home, Tom was very firm with his response. He said, "I'm not going to talk to you about this. The investigation was already done, and it was already ruled she took her own life." Now, he used the S word that we can't use here on YouTube, even though it's such an important topic. But then Tom became outraged when he found out that Jenna and Joel, who I told you still had access to Ashley and Tom's children, had taken them for a visit. And while they were in their care, Ashley's parents actually took them in for additional forensic interviews without Tom's knowledge, which actually violated a court order that was in place that strictly prohibited anyone from discussing Ashley's death with the children. The court order was specifically put in place to protect the girls from being exposed to the ongoing trauma that it could cause. When confronted with this violation, Jenna denied discussing the investigation with her grandchildren, but she did acknowledge she took the girls for those forensic interviews in June of 2014. So that was kind of confusing, but she's like, no, I didn't violate it because I didn't talk to them about it, but, officers did. Chris Sarlo Bergman interviewed the girls at the Children's Advocate Center just like last time, and here's the information that was gathered. Jolie, who is now 7 years old, said that she recalled hearing her parents yelling during the incident, but it had been 2 years, and memories don't usually get better over time. Now, things only took a turn for the worse for Tom when a former Weld County Sheriff deputy who had responded to Tom's 911 call told private investigator William Irwin, hired to investigate potential misconduct by officers, that he actually heard Tom say, "I can't believe I shot her. I can't believe she's dead." It's very similar to what I think Nick had heard, right? However, the statement was met with skepticism because it came only after the case had gained a significant amount of media attention. And that is a problem. And it seemed that there was the same issue with the statements from neighbors. It's like once something's in the media and it gets really big, questions start to arise and there's more doubt to what people had seen and what people had done in moments. And they seem to latch onto these cases and want to be in the media themselves. And they might misremember or even make things up to insert themselves into the story. In the deputy's situation, many people questioned why he had waited until the case was featured on TV before coming forward with this information. He worked for the same sheriff's department that Tom did, and because he delayed bringing this information to light, it raised doubts about his credibility. And then he ended up getting fired because of his dishonesty. Still, Tom was holding on to some hope when in June of 2014, 4 months after the investigation into Officer Michael Yates had begun, it was determined that the officer had not violated any policies during his involvement in the case. He was the one that took the witness statements. This outside investigation proved that there had been no wrongdoing and no charges to press, and they didn't look into the matter any further. All protocols were followed. Tom's attorneys remained optimistic that the investigation into Ashley's death would soon close once again, since the entire reopening of this case had hinged on Officer Yates' involvement and Nick's statement. So now that they knew that nothing foul had happened, they should close the case. And when Chief Brandt was asked about the situation, he said that Officer Yates denied ever speaking with Nick, and that Officer Yates stood by his version of events. That Kathy had told him that Cheryl called to say her neighbor shot herself, not that her husband shot her. But to be fair, Chief Brandt did admit that none of his officers had followed up with Cheryl, and she was an important ear witness. This was something he acknowledged as an error. But remember, this was not deemed to be a homicide to begin with. So many times a true investigation is not carried out, and therefore witnesses would not have been brought back in at all. And Chief Brandt denied that there had ever been a cover-up to protect Tom. However, when asked why the case had been closed and deemed self-inflicted in the first place, the chief admitted he had no idea because he was not involved in the actual death investigation. He was just the chief of the department. But everything was brought to his attention when he was briefed on it 2 years later, when reporter Justin Joseph began looking into it. Although Tom expected things to cool down, they heated up instead. That's because the district attorney, Mike Rourke, decided to have a grand jury meet in private to determine whether there was enough evidence to actually prosecute him. In a criminal case, a grand jury's role is to assess whether there's sufficient evidence to formally charge a suspect with a felony. It's not like a real jury trial where a jury is going to determine guilt or innocence. A grand jury's job is to meet in private, hear the evidence presented by the prosecution only, just to see if probable cause exists and charges should be filed in the first place. The prosecutor will present evidence, they'll ask witnesses to come forward, but the defense is not present at this stage at all, so it's very one-sided. But if there is enough evidence, they issue an indictment, which is a formal charge against the suspect, and that means the case will go to trial. Many prosecutors believe that meeting with a grand jury is helpful in bigger cases or trickier cases like Ashley's, where they want a fresh set of eyes looking at everything. Plus, since it's closed, it stops information from getting blown out of proportion in the media, and hopefully it can lead to a chance for the jury not to be swayed or tainted. Now, this way prosecutors can be sure they have a solid case without revealing everything they know too soon. In this case, the grand jury convened on November 12th of 2014. Ashley's mother, Jenna, testified about the mistreatment that she believed existed in Ashley and Tom's marriage, both mentally and physically. She said she was always scared that Tom would hurt Ashley. And she also mentioned she felt Ashley only needed mood stabilizers because of Tom. It's a pretty bold statement. District Attorney Rourke presented all the evidence, showing both homicide and self-inflicted theories, but told the jury not to indict Tom unless they were certain that he could be responsible. And clearly they were, because on November 17th of 2014, the grand jury concluded there was probable cause to believe Tom could have killed Ashley in a fit of rage using her 9mm Taurus and then staged it to look like she had taken her life. The next day on November 18th, Tom was arrested in Bloomington, Indiana, after returning from the grocery store, and he was charged with second-degree murder and held in the Monroe County Jail in Indiana, awaiting extradition to Colorado. Ashley's stepfather, Joel, called the arrest an answered prayer, a relief, and a sense of justice. But this is really only the beginning of the story in many ways. Once Tom was extradited, he was placed in Larimer County Jail in Colorado. All the while, his biggest concern was actually for his 3 children, fearing Ashley's parents would raise them and tell them that he killed their mother, no matter what the truth was. It was clear that his mom was not a fan of Tom, and probably never was. Tom claimed that Jenna and Joel had already repeatedly told his children that he was responsible for their mother's death from the very beginning, before he even had a chance to tell his side of the story. Eventually, Tom's mother, Anna, traveled to Indiana and successfully gained custody of the children. Now, this may seem unfair, but he was their legal father for the 2 that he adopted and the biological father of the youngest, Blake. And Ashley's parents were unfortunately caught up in this trial. Initially, Tom's bail was set at $200,000, but it was raised to $500,000 by Judge Thomas Corman. And then even though Tom made bond, the judge ordered that he remain in Colorado, stating that he could not return to his home in Indiana while he was awaiting trial. And his attorney, Iris Eaton, a well-known defense attorney from Denver, took Tom's case and also didn't hold back in court. She argued that it wasn't right for the judge to ban Tom from going back to Indiana to take care of his children. She said it violated his basic rights as a parent. According to Eaton, there were other less extreme ways to ensure that Tom would show up for court, like GPS monitoring or regular check-ins with officials. She also pointed out that Tom had cooperated thoroughly in this entire investigation, and that his family had to make significant financial sacrifices to come up with his bail money. But the prosecutor, Anthea Carrasco, pushed back, saying the defense attorney's argument did not hold up. The prosecutor argued that being a parent isn't just about living under the same roof with your kids. Tom, she said, still had the right to make decisions about their education and their medical care, and no one was trying to take that away. But then again, making decisions about a children's health care and education doesn't make you a parent either. So I'm not sure how that's a better argument, but the judge ultimately sided with the prosecution and denied Tom's request to return to his home in Indiana. Things then escalated when Tom appealed his case to the Colorado Supreme Court, and new details about Ashley's death came to light during this hearing. The defense presented 2 alleged notes that Ashley had written, which looked like goodbye letters, for lack of a better way to tell you that. One was typed and one was handwritten. Now, these were letters that Ashley had written to Tom months before she died. Detective Jacqueline Shackley from Fort Collins testified that after analyzing the notes, it was confirmed that they were written by Ashley, but Ashley's mother wasn't convinced. Jenna believed the notes seemed questionable since they hadn't surfaced earlier. She said, "If I had something like that, I'd hand it over right away." Well, these were personal notes that were shared with Tom. They were important to him, and he only released them because of the situation that he was in. The defense also highlighted Ashley's mental health struggles, saying she was under psychiatric care and prescribed 3 different medications at the time of her death. Now, I was able to find a picture of these. I've showed this before, but again, just to remind you, it was Adderall, Seroquel, and clonazepam. Pretty much everyone knows that Adderall is for hyperactivity or having ADD. Seroquel is usually for bipolar, and it seemed to be in this case as well. And the clonazepam is used for anxiety. Tom's attorney also noted that the gun used in the shooting was owned by Ashley. I mean, I don't know if that really holds that much weight, but it was just one of the arguments that she used her own gun, so it leaned towards her doing this to herself. I also think this was mentioned to establish that she had access to the gun, she knew where it was, and she would know how to use it. They even pointed out that after the Evans Police Department wrapped up their investigation in March of 2013, Tom returned most of the evidence to the police, including Ashley's gun. And their argument was simple. If Tom was guilty or trying to cover something up, he would have destroyed the evidence instead of giving it all back so that it could be scrutinized and tested. Despite the defense's efforts, the Colorado Supreme Court did not side with Tom. He was going to trial. And to make matters worse, just weeks before his trial was set to begin, Tom's bond agent withdrew. And his attorney said it was nothing to do with Tom. He didn't violate any terms, but without a bond agent, Tom had no choice. He had to go back to jail and wait. Ashley's parents were also going through their own legal situation. They teamed up with Denver law firm Holland, Edwards & Grossman to file a lawsuit against Evans Police Chief Rick Brandt and 4 other officers. They accused the department of covering up what could have been a homicide by Ashley's husband, Tom Fallis. The lawsuit claimed that investigators ignored key evidence, changed incriminating statements to make them sound harmless, and skipped basic steps like DNA testing. According to Jenna and Joel, the police went out of their way to make Ashley's death look like she caused it instead of treating it like a potential murder that it might have been. During a pretrial hearing for Tom's case, remember Jedediah Pepping, the guy I told you about from Ashley's past that had a brief affair with her? Well, he testified about the incident where Tom found them together in a parking lot. Jedediah recalled that Ashley told him Tom had their children in the car at the time, which was a bit worrisome. But he didn't get the sense that Ashley was ever afraid of her husband. In fact, Jedediah said that Ashley stood her ground. She yelled back at Tom during their confrontation, and Ashley had also told Jedediah that if things ever got serious between her and Tom, meaning if they were fighting and things got intense, that it would come down to a gunfight. And she added she wasn't scared of him, and she was able to hold her own with her gun. Flora Roth, a neighbor and friend of Ashley, said that Ashley had talked to her about her marital issues, including Tom leaving notes on her car, attempting to track her whereabouts when he thought she was cheating, and even leaving the kids at home so he could do so. Flora said that Ashley also told her that Tom had pushed her around before, but he had never hit her. But she did say she wanted a divorce. Now, Claire Duran, another friend and coworker of Ashley's, remembered Tom bringing Ashley some dinner to work in 2011. She thought this was a nice gesture, only for Ashley to tell her that it was just Tom checking up on her. That's the way he would control her. I thought that was interesting. However, Claire said she couldn't remember many of the details, and the defense really dug into her lack of specifics about Ashley and Tom's relationship. Detective Jacqueline Shackley, who took over the case in 2014, said she didn't find anything in the phone data to suggest that Tom was ever having an affair. And remember that this was why Ashley supposedly reconnected with Jedediah in the first place, or so she said. This detective also said there was no documented incidents of Tom ever physically causing any harm to Ashley, despite the one friend saying that he had pushed her in the past. The judge decided that Ashley and Tom's daughters could testify in court, with videos from their 2012 interviews allowed to be shown to the jurors. However, he excluded the interviews from 2014, where Ashley's parents brought them back in. He thought that too much time had passed and that their memories were probably not as good as they would have been, and that seemed fair to me. The judge also threw out some of Ashley's comments to her mother and Jedediah about Tom's alleged affair, and that's because, as I just mentioned, they didn't find any proof of it, so they were leaving that out because it's something to do with his character. And I just want to always point this out, that things might seem unfair to us while we're watching a trial unfold, but it's complicated. And judges have way more context and evidence than we ever will, so I defer to their judgment. But the judge did allow statements Ashley made about the marriage that she had before her death, as well as things she said about wanting a divorce and how Tom pushed her, but didn't hit her. And Tom's trial for the 2012 murder of his wife, Ashley, kicked off in March of 2016, 4 years after she died. It was intense, as you can expect. Tom's defense attorney, Iris Eaton, argued passionately that Tom did not kill Ashley and that her death was a tragedy but committed at her own hands. She painted a picture of Ashley as a beautiful woman on the outside that was dealing with a lot of pain on the inside. She had a volatile personality, she was drinking heavily that New Year's Eve, and recently suffered a miscarriage and wasn't taking her medication. The defense described Ashley as a pressure cooker, ready to explode, and even read part of that letter I told you about that she wrote to Tom 6 months before her death to show the jury how deeply depressed she was. It was dated July 24th of 2011. I'm going to read it for you in its entirety. This was one of the letters that Tom kept to himself until he was charged with her murder. It said, "Dear Tom, I am sorry with all I have caused. I am not happy about it. I'm sorry for your pain, but I can no longer go on living this life. I'm a failure at everything. A wife, a mom, at having a career at school, everything. I have so much pain on the inside, I can no longer take it. I'm sorry to do this to you and the kids, but I find myself not even liking my children. Every day is a chore with them and you. I have to pretend to be happy. I have to pretend to be someone I am not. Please make sure to raise the kids to continue to go to the school we have chosen. I do love them. I just can't take this life any longer. Please make sure you let them know every day that I do love them and this was not their fault. This has not just been over the past few months. It has been going on for a while. Our marriage is a shame. We have no connection anymore, no matter how hard we or you try. It just isn't going to work. I am someone you have made up in your head, making me someone out to be who I am not. I am just a effed up in the head person, and I cannot live with it anymore. I can't live being me. I hate me. I hate when I wake up looking at the life I've made, how my kids hate me, how you look at me. It's not with love in your eyes, but suspicion. I've asked to go to counseling with you, but you seem to think we can fix everything with candies and rose petals. Well, that is not the case. See, I have been up and down this road for my entire life, not being good enough for anyone or thing. You deserve better than me, and I can't go on any longer. I am sorry." End quote. I'm really curious what you think of this letter, because I think it could go both ways. It could be a goodbye forever, because she's going to leave this earth, but it could also be a goodbye to Tom, as if she's going to leave him, and figured that maybe he would get custody of the children because she is not stable. The statements like, "I can no longer go on living like this," can mean life specifically, or the life she has with Tom living together. And the part where Ashley says to let the kids know it's not their fault. This can still mean a divorce. But then the part where she says she hates being her and she can't live being her, that does tend to lean more towards this truly being a letter with the intent of leaving everything behind for good, including ending her life. And to challenge some of the circumstantial evidence against Tom, his defense attorney presented a text exchange between Tom and Ashley from December 17th, 2011, just 2 weeks before Ashley's death. Remember those scratches on his chest? The ones that the detective pointed out in his interview. Well, in these text messages, Tom had sent Ashley a picture of his bare chest. Basically, he had shaved it upon her request, something the defense argued Tom did to spice up their marriage. Tom's message read, quote, "There, you have to get your way, so here it is. Thought you might like it, smiley face," end quote, along with an image of his shaved chest. This exchange was used to show that it was true. Tom had shaved recently, and the hair had been growing back in, causing irritation. So even if people like Nancy Grace, and I have nothing really against her, but she made a lot of comments, she went on like a public rant on TV about how absurd Tom's reasons were about why his chest looked so suspicious. Well, here's the proof that some things can look odd, but have a reasonable explanation. And this showed that the scratches were not from an altercation. There was another text that was highlighted in court. This one was from December 30th, just a day before that fateful night. Tom is in white and Ashley is in green. He texted Ashley with, "I'm so in love with you," 2 exclamation points and a smiley face. And she responded with something the court blurred out, but I think I can guess what it has to do with. It seemed like she also shaved something for Tom, and she was saying it was sore, and then saying LOL, and I love you too. Tom responded with, "Mine too, LOL." And this kind of alluded to them going back and forth and kind of laughing about the fact they both shaved and now they're kind of in pain because of it. And they were making light of it. And she said, "Try mine. Geez, all you ever say is mine too." And Tom said, "Whatever, I was joking, Missy. Mine aren't sore anyway, just itchy, LOL." Clearly, as I told you, they were both dealing with the aftermath of shaving. But the next text from later in the afternoon is Ashley telling Tom that the pregnancy test that she just took was positive. She said, "OMG, it's positive." But sadly, just one day later, she would apparently miscarry and also be dead. This evidence leaned towards Tom and Ashley not being in a negative place when the death occurred. But on the prosecution side, Weld County Deputy District Attorney Anthea Carrasco came out swinging. She opened with a fiery quote from Tom the night that Ashley died, saying, "You guys wanted to effing get her high." This was allegedly directed at her family in the early morning hours after her death when he was standing outside. But remember what they were yelling back to him. They were yelling, "We know you killed her." So it was a back and forth, but of course the jury doesn't know all those things. They're just hearing what's happening now. The prosecution argued that Tom was furious that night, blaming Ashley Sammy for everything, from her wanting to smoke pot with them at a party to her decision to get her tubes tied. According to the prosecution, that anger boiled over, and in a fit of rage, Tom grabbed Ashley's 9mm Taurus handgun, shot her, and then tried to convince everyone that she had done it to herself. Ashley's mother took the stand during the second day of testimony and made it clear that she didn't believe her daughter would do this. She told the court she suspected parts of the police report had been altered or omitted, alleging a cover-up to hide the truth. And then Ashley's aunt, Peggy Schmitzer, who had been at the New Year's Eve party that night, also testified. Peggy recalled Tom being upset because Ashley wanted to smoke, and he was worried that it could cost her her job. She claimed Tom said about Ashley, quote, "She's too stupid to figure out for herself. She's an effing idiot," end quote, insinuating he had to do all the thinking and decision-making for Ashley. According to Peggy, Tom then stormed off, slamming the bedroom door, and he never came back out. If Tom was adamant about making decisions for Ashley, this leaned towards Tom also deciding that Ashley would die that night. Ashley's uncle, John Schmitzer, also testified. He said that he was the one that offered Ashley the joint at the party and described returning to her house after hearing something terrible had happened. He told the court he confronted Tom, yelling at him and accusing him of shooting Ashley. He admitted he called Tom a coward and told him, "You should have shot yourself instead." During cross-examination, Ashley's uncle revealed something really tough about his family history, something that I've already briefly mentioned. The fact that his own mother and his own brother had both taken their own lives using a gun. Tom's defense team jumped on this. They suggested that Ashley's death could have followed a similar tragic pattern. They used this piece of evidence to argue that Tom wasn't responsible for her death, and it was in fact a pattern and self-inflicted. Now it was Tom's parents' turn to speak, and we've heard a lot from Ashley's parents. And when Anna and Jim took the stand, they provided a very different perspective on things. Anna described her son as being overcome with emotion, crying, and being visibly distraught after Ashley was shot. Jim echoed this, saying Tom appeared to be in deep emotional pain. When asked directly if Tom had ever confessed to killing Ashley while the three of them stood outside in earshot of the neighbor's window, Jim was adamant. He said never. All Tom said was he didn't understand why Ashley would do this. So of course, this testimony contradicts what Nick said he heard that night when he said Tom confessed to his parents. But of course, we have to remember, it's Tom's parents. Would they lie and cover for him? Who knows? Tom's mom shared a heartbreaking moment with the jury. She recalled hearing Joel, Ashley's stepfather, in a police SUV with Ashley and Tom's 3 children, telling them their dad had shot their mom. With the lights and the sirens, Anna remembered her grandchildren just screaming, insisting that their father would never, ever do something like that. And that is truly hard to hear. All of this is. I can imagine how tough it was for both of these families. Ashley's therapist, Dr. Russell Johnson, took the stand, and he said that he didn't believe she was in danger to herself when he saw her in December of 2011, the same month that this happened. He explained that she didn't appear depressed or even on the verge of doing anything dangerous. But during cross-examination, Tom's defense attorney pointed out that Dr. Johnson wasn't aware of all the medications that Ashley was taking, including prescriptions from other doctors. Remember that? Dr. Johnson also said he didn't know about the notes that Ashley wrote in the months before her death. When the defense asked if those details would have changed his opinion about Ashley's state of mind, Dr. Johnson acknowledged they would have. As the second week of Tom's trial got underway, the prosecution's star witness, Nick Glover, took the stand. Nick, who was just 15 when Ashley died, testified that he heard Tom confess to shooting her and killing her outside his bedroom window. When the prosecutor asked how he could be certain that the voice he heard was Tom's, Nick said he was 100% sure. But Tom's defense attorney cross-examined Nick for over an hour, and guess what? Nick wasn't cooperative. He would always respond with, "I don't recall," to most of the questions. Over 90 times he responded with that. And that's not a good sign. Tom's attorney tried to paint Nick as an unreliable witness to impeach him, pointing out a very important detail that had not been revealed before. Nick had actually gone camping with Tom after he allegedly heard this so-called confession. Yep. So there he was, hanging out with Tom on a camping trip. When asked about this trip, Nick admitted he was never comfortable with Tom after this, but he just never told anyone. So he's comfortable enough to hang out with a supposed killer? The defense also tried to discredit Nick's testimony by asking him to identify Jim Fallis, Tom's father, who Nick claimed Tom had been talking to that night that he confessed. But Nick couldn't even do that. And Jim was right there in the courtroom. Madison Glover, Nick's sister, who had been looking out to that same window as Nick that night, also took the stand. Her version of events differed from her brother's. Madison testified that she heard Tom say something like, "What did I do?" but nothing that sounded like a confession to murder. It was more like someone so overcome with emotion, thinking something they did caused Ashley to do this. Kathy Glover, Nick and Madison's mom, then took the stand. And she shared the version I've mentioned a few times now, that Madison's friend Cheryl called her at 1 a.m. on the night Ashley died, and Cheryl supposedly said, "Please tell me you called the police because your neighbor just shot his wife." But when Cheryl herself was asked about this during Tom's trial, she said she couldn't remember ever making that call. The game of telephone is based off of real life. Sometimes things get lost in translation or relation, as in relaying a message to someone and then them relaying it to someone else, and on and on and on. It can get very distorted. When asked about what Cheryl remembered hearing from Tom and Ashley's house that night, she said she recalled hearing arguing, but that it was nothing specific. But there had been a party that night, which included both Tom and Ashley getting loud, but that happened while everyone was there. And it could have been confused with what happened during the shooting. If you're not purposely trying to listen and keep track of time, it's really hard to know specifically what you heard in sequence. The prosecutor pressed Cheryl, asking if she remembered what she said on the phone that night when she said she heard a woman's voice saying, "Get off me." Cheryl responded, "I do not." So she admitted to the jury she was intoxicated that New Year's Eve, and she acknowledged being drunk and it could have affected her ability to remember or even accurately report what had happened or what was going on. The prosecution's second key witness was the former Weld County Sheriff's Deputy Chris Graves, the one who got fired after he claimed he overheard Tom confessing to killing Ashley, but then failed to come forward for a couple years with this information. Well, Chris testified that Tom was screaming, "I can't believe I shot her. I can't believe she's dead." When the prosecutor asked why he didn't write a report about it, because he didn't report it and he didn't write a report about it, Chris said it wasn't his case to handle since the Evans Police Department was in charge. Okay, but you are a cop and you are responding to the scene, so it didn't add up. Looking back though, Chris admitted he regretted not writing it down. He told the jury he had nothing to gain when he decided to speak up 2 years after Ashley's death, and shared of how much it cost him personally, saying, "I was fired from the sheriff's office, and once that happened, basically they took everything away from him." Chris explained on top of that, both he and his wife were kicked off of the Stampede Committee. And this is a group that runs the Greenlee Stampede every summer. And it's something they truly valued. But here's another thing. To contradict what Chris said he heard, Evans Police Sergeant Dan Raunas, another one of the first responders after Tom's 911 call, testified that he never heard Tom confess and said none of the other officers on scene reported hearing it either. He was there the whole time, and also pointed out that Tom didn't get any special treatment just because he worked at Weld County Jail. Not at all. Additionally, there was Sergeant Paul Wood, a supervisor from the Weld County Sheriff's Office, who testified that he was there the whole time as well, and he did not hear Tom confess either. And he made it clear that if anyone had heard a confession, they would have been expected to file a report, and they would have. Further, Sergeant Wood said Chris Graves never mentioned anything to him about hearing Tom admit to shooting Ashley. So this refuted Chris's claim altogether. One of the most anticipated testimonies in Tom's trial came from retired Evans police officer Michael Yates. He was the one who had faced accusations of leaving out key statements and miswriting others. Officer Yates testified that although he did speak to Nick and Madison on the night that Ashley was shot, neither of them provided any information that would have been considered crucial to the case, and that is why it wasn't included in his interview reports. He specifically denied Nick ever telling him about hearing Tom confess to his parents about murdering Ashley. In fact, Officer Yates explained to the jury that if anyone had mentioned hearing a confession while at a crime scene, he would have immediately stopped the interviews, taken the witness to the police station, and questioned them there more formally so he could have recorded the whole thing. He also made it clear that an external investigation found no evidence that he had ever altered any reports or left anything out or done anything that wasn't part of the protocol. He even explained his own process, saying he took notes during interviews with Nick, Madison, and Kathy, and had included their responses in his report. He confirmed that his report accurately reflected what he wrote down, which is what the witnesses had told him. And the reason why notes wouldn't exist would be because the Evans Police Department actually shreds their notes after writing the report. That's standard practice. Flora Roth, Ashley's friend, remember her? The one that shared the conversations she had with Ashley that summer, which she referred to as man-bashing chats, where Ashley admitted that Tom pushed her but never hit her. She added some more information. Ashley had told her that she'd been taking strong medications that left her sleeping most of the time. And when the defense cross-examined Flora, she told the jury about an incident from the summer of 2011 when she found little Blake, Ashley and Tom's young son, wandering around outside unattended. Flora said she brought Blake back to the house, but no one answered the door, so she let herself inside. And once she was in there, she found Ashley and her 2 daughters fast asleep, while Tom was at work. And even though she tried hard to wake Ashley up, she couldn't do so. So she woke up one of Ashley's daughters to care for Blake instead. Wow, that's scary. And I've heard this before in other cases where it's difficult to wake someone who's under the influence of certain medications, and it can be very dangerous for them to be left to care for others or even themselves. Even with this concerning event, Flora emphasized to the jury that she never believed Ashley would harm herself. Additionally, we have Nicole Wood Belby. This is one of Ashley's close friends. She shared that in the months leading up to Ashley's death, her friends seemed to be struggling with what she referred to as a darkness surrounding her. Nicole described how Ashley was grappling with mental health issues and had a difficulty staying even-keeled and calm. Instead, she would have mood swings, and she would exhibit very impulsive behavior, and this is really important. After this, the court heard Tom's 911 call from the night that Ashley died, a moment that moved many jurors to tears. This emotional impact was heightened by the voice of the couple's daughter on the recording. Tom himself broke down in court while listening. He was hunching over and sobbing as he was hearing his own desperate pleas for Ashley to stay alive for their family. And then another emotional moment happened when the court played those interviews from 2012 with Ashley and Tom's daughters, Jolie and Madeline, at the kids' place after Ashley died. Watching the girls cry on screen had Tom in tears. And again, looking over at the jury, you could just tell this was impacting them very strongly. By the time the video ended, Tom's eyes were red and puffy. Amy Williams took the stand. She worked for the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, and she was there during the initial investigation into Ashley's death. She testified that the bedroom where the shooting happened showed no signs of a struggle, aside from some messy bedding, a couple of picture frames on the floor on the other side of the room from where Ashley was found, and another that was slightly tilted on the wall. The room seemed mostly untouched. Further, Amy also told jurors that she didn't find any voids in the blood spatter near where Ashley was shot. She explained that a void happens when something or someone blocks the blood from being moved to a place, right? But there was no indication that in this case there had been a void. This point was used by the defense to back the idea that Ashley had been alone on that side of the bed when the gun went off, meaning Tom was not there creating a void. Carol Crow, a gunshot residue expert from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, broke down some very key findings for the jury. She said tests showed gunshot residue on Ashley's hands and on Tom's face and shirt. This leaned more towards Ashley being the one that held that gun and Tom getting gunshot residue on him from holding her later when he came to her aid. Dr. James Wilkerson, who I told you performed Ashley's autopsy, explained what likely happened to her body after the gunshot. He said the bullet hit part of her brain that controls movement, causing her muscles to relax instantly, which means she would have collapsed. And he said, forget about the dramatic Hollywood-style reactions. He told the jurors, it's not like that in the movies, where it jerks you around the room. Instead, her body probably fell naturally, with muscles relaxing and untwisting. But to predict exactly how someone would fall is really tricky. And he said you could get a different result every single time you tried to recreate it. Additionally, Dr. Wilkerson pointed out that Ashley didn't have any broken fingernails or injured knuckles, which were the kind of injuries you would expect if you had been in a fight. A seasoned crime scene investigator with 35 years in law enforcement and 25 years in forensic lab work, Dan Gilliam, offered his expert opinion on the evidence found at the scene. He pointed out that in his extensive experience with homicide shootings, they're usually fueled by rage and typically don't involve a single shot. He was actually called in to give a second opinion about some questionable blood spatter found in the bedroom where Ashley was found. I showed you this on the wall. After reviewing the evidence and consulting with other investigators, including Evans police and attorneys, they all came to the conclusion that the scene aligned with one being self-inflicted. Actually, there were 6 different agencies that examined the evidence in this case and concluded the same thing, that this was not a homicide. Dan Gilliam supported this conclusion with several observations. He explained the blood spatter on the wall and on Ashley's clothing, along with the trajectory of the bullet, were consistent with someone holding a gun to their temple and pulling the trigger. To demonstrate this in court, the defense attorney actually asked Dan to work with another attorney they had there. Her name was Drew, who was about the same height as Ashley, and they recreated the position that Ashley was likely in when she was shot. This was very interesting and very important for the trial. I have some of this to show you, but I don't know how deep I can go because it's a sensitive topic. Drew knelt by a mock-up of Ashley's bedroom furniture using a toy gun to show how Ashley would have held the weapon at her temple based on the trajectory of the bullet. The defense also had Dan demonstrate how Tom, who was 6 feet tall, would have had to position himself if he were the one to fire this gun. According to Dan, the positioning would have been so awkward and unnatural, he said, if I'm standing, it's very unnatural for me to reach down and cock my wrist back. Further, he explained that the recoil from the gun could have made this position even harder to maintain. He also demonstrated another scenario to the jurors where Tom would have maybe crouched down over Ashley and had her pull the trigger. However, he noted that this position would have put Tom directly in line with the spent cartridge, which ultimately landed several feet away from Ashley's body. Had Tom been in that position, he explained, the spent cartridge would have struck him in the chest, and it didn't. Most of this testimony focused on the amount of blood found on Tom's clothing. The expert explained that this blood came from Tom trying to help Ashley by cradling her in his lap. This was transfer stains from trying to stop her from bleeding. He used a mannequin and demonstrated various scenarios to explain how the blood could have ended up on Tom's clothing. The trajectory of the blood was very important because it was kind of in a curve on the wall. Remember that? And what's interesting about this is, let's say you are stationary as the victim. So you're standing in one place or sitting or kneeling in one place, and someone comes up to you and they hold a gun and shoot. The blood would usually go in one direction. But in this case, it leaned more towards this being self-inflicted because of the way the pattern moved. It would have because Ashley was falling when it happened. Although it could be quick, you can imagine when a gun goes off, you would fall at the same time, so the pattern would move instead of being straight. Does that make sense? So that curve made more sense, even if it happened so quickly. It's hard to explain, but I'm sure you can get the picture. When questioned by the defense, Dan was asked if he believed that the most likely scenario would have been Ashley inflicting this fatal gunshot wound on herself. Dan answered, "I believe so," reinforcing the argument that Ashley's death was consistent with being of her own doing. Now, a psychiatrist and professor at the University of Colorado, Dr. Michael Allen, also weighed in on this case. He testified that based on his review of Ashley's history, including emails, text messages, medical records, and personal accounts, he believed Ashley was at a high risk for doing this to herself at the time of her death. Dr. Allen cited a number of factors that contributed to this risk: Ashley's history of anxiety, depression, insomnia, substance use, and past notes that look like goodbye letters. Additionally, he noted Ashley's struggles with coping with stress and her impulsiveness, which made her vulnerable to self-harm. Impulsiveness is key, and why these deaths are often misunderstood and very complicated. Dr. Allen explained that the fight between Ashley and Tom on that night that she died could have been a tipping point for her. According to Dr. Allen, for someone already at risk like Ashley, this kind of confrontation can push them over the edge. But now the prosecution has to counter these testimonies from Dan Gillian and Dr. Michael Allen. So they bring in an expert of their own, Jonathan Priest, a respected forensic analyst and consultant with many years of experience in the field. Jonathan Priest shared that he spent about 25 to 35 hours reviewing Ashley's case, going through thousands of pages of documents and case material, including photos, even visiting the crime scene. However, he made it clear that he did not conduct any of his own tests. Jonathan disagreed with the idea that the blood evidence at the scene supported a conclusion that Ashley took her life. According to Jonathan, if Tom had been across the room like he said he was, there would have been more blood. He pointed out that even if Tom reached her in just a second, Ashley's heart would have had time to beat a few more times before he could apply any pressure to her wound. This, he argued, should have resulted in much more blood on the floor. There were more issues that Jonathan found with the investigation when he reviewed the files. Jonathan also took issue with the bloodstains found on Tom's clothing. While the blood on his shirt could be explained by his proximity to Ashley, Jonathan noticed the pattern that was on his shirt, starting at his chest and then running downward. He questioned whether this was consistent with Tom's story of events. He said, "My ultimate opinion is that at the time the shot was fired, Tom and Ashley were in contact with one another, or at least very close." Jonathan even suggested there was a possibility there was a struggle where the gun could have gone off while the two were fighting over it. He further explained that it was plausible that Tom and Ashley could have been in the middle of a confrontation when the shot was fired, which might explain how the bloodstains were so, abundant on Tom's shirt. To illustrate this theory, Jonathan demonstrated with a model of the couple's bedroom, and Jonathan explained how a struggle could have played out, with Tom holding the gun near Ashley's head while they argued or fought. He showed how the gun could have gone off in the middle of the struggle, with Tom then possibly dropping the gun and pulling Ashley into him, transferring blood to his shirt. After both sides rested their cases, the jury deliberated, and I have to say, I know that I can't show you everything in this trial, but it was intense, and there's so much evidence back and forth, and so many different theories of what could have happened. And just taking in all this information, if I was on this jury, I would go in having a lot to think about. Let's just say that. But they only deliberated for about 3.5 hours, including an hour for lunch, so not that long. They returned with their verdict very quickly, something that stuck out to Ashley's family. I think in many cases when the jury doesn't take very long, the assumption is that they found the defendant guilty. Quick to the point, made their mind up, very strong evidence. The judge read the decision. Tom Fallis was found not guilty of second-degree murder and all the lesser charges in the death of Ashley Fallis. As the verdict was announced, Tom broke down in tears. His attorneys stood by his side, offering him support. His family and friends who were in the gallery were visibly emotional as well. And on the other side, Ashley's family quietly just left the courtroom with their heads down, and they chose to avoid the media altogether. Ashley's stepfather, Joel, later spoke to 48 Hours, and he expressed his shock. Joel was stunned that Tom had been acquitted. He was especially taken aback by how quickly the jury reached their decision. His wife, Jenna, shared her confusion as well, telling 48 Hours, "I don't get it. I really don't get it." Now, I want to point out that 3 of the jurors actually spoke out. So if anyone was confused about what happened, they got some insight. Dylan Pierce and Devana Maharis spoke to 48 Hours about their decision, and they explained that they felt the case boiled down to reasonable doubt. There was so much reasonable doubt by the conflicting crime scene experts and people, talking about the blood stains and everything, like I said. And while Jonathan Priest's testimony was compelling, they agreed it didn't provide enough concrete evidence to prove that Tom was guilty. And the jurors had questions about the details of the crime scene, particularly about where Tom was in relation to Ashley when the shot was fired. But at the end of the day, they didn't feel there was enough evidence to prove where he was or what happened that night to convict him. Again, just not enough evidence, reasonable doubt built. A third juror, Debbie McEvers, who was the jury foreperson, she also spoke out. She explained to the media that the decision was unanimous. Everyone was on the same page. Now, even though some jurors did have some questions about the specifics of the scene, they ultimately concluded that no one could say with certainty that Tom was responsible. And regarding Nick's testimony, Deborah McEvers shared her thoughts on that. She said Nick Glover lacked authenticity from top to bottom. He was shady. Interesting, right? Very interesting hearing from jurors. And juror Devana added that she believed the argument between Tom and Ashley that night might have been more intense than suggested, but it still didn't mean that Tom pulled the trigger. And both the jurors, Dylan and Devana, questioned why this case was even brought to trial to begin with, saying they felt that it was due to media pressure rather than the strength of the evidence. Now remember Justin Joseph, he was the reporter who was really the one responsible for getting this case back in the spotlight, which led to it being tried. And he shared his perspective with 48 Hours, stating the police department and the Weld County Sheriff did not do their jobs that night that this happened. He felt that in the end, the juror's decision was a result of lack of conclusive evidence. So that was his perspective. He thought there just wasn't enough evidence, even though I think there was a lot of evidence. It's just, not enough to sway them, I guess. For Ashley's family, the verdict did not bring closure. Joel and Jenna still believe that Tom is responsible for Ashley's death. Ashley's loved ones are convinced that she wouldn't have left her children behind if it wasn't for something tragic. Their main focus was maintaining the relationship with their grandchildren. Though they weren't sure what that would look like after the trial, Joel and Jenna spoke to their grandchildren, Jolie, Madeline, and Blake, through their 48 Hours interview. They told them that Ashley loved them deeply. They wanted to make sure that the children knew that Ashley was always with them. Meanwhile, Tom reflected on his life after the trial. He talked about the fact an officer called him to tell him that Ashley's gravestone had been vandalized at the cemetery. The officer described how someone had written "soon" underneath Tom's name on the marker. Since the trial, Tom has only returned to Colorado twice, and each time his children questioned him with fears. One of those times he had to reassure them that he was only going to Colorado by choice and not because he was being arrested again. His youngest children rarely even ask about Ashley's death, but Tom has been transparent with his teenage daughter, who came home one day asking why her mom would take her own life. Tom explained that he didn't have the answers, but he tried to comfort her, telling her that Ashley had gone to heaven to care for their unborn child, and that he would be there to care for them. I would never claim to be an expert, but I too have a family member that took their own life, and it's not something that many of us can ever fully understand. But if we understand impulsiveness in some of these cases that mirror Ashley's, it can at least provide some insight. Not in all cases, but ones where something happens so suddenly. I've done a lot of reading on this to heal from my own lingering pain that I felt and to understand it as much as I could. Many survivors who have tried and failed at doing something like this to themselves talk about their impulsiveness, that it only took a second to make that decision. The ones who live to talk about it say that they regret it and can't explain how it felt when they made that choice, but in the moment it seemed like the only choice they could make. It's often a split-second choice that leaves lasting consequences, and it is very sad. I would love to hear your thoughts, but please also be respectful because Ashley's now adult daughters, or even her loved ones, or Tom's family could be reading your comments. Your feelings might be mixed about this case, and in the end, I always defer to the jury because they knew way more than I ever could about the evidence that was presented. But it is sad for everyone, and I truly hope that they can heal from their pain. And I thank you so much for being here with me today. Thank you so much for watching and listening to Ashley's story. I will see you in my next video. Bye.